wrote an occasional letter to Tuck Hostetler. That was it. He owned neither a television nor a radio, and though he had a cell phone, only work numbers were listed in the contact list. He picked up groceries and essentials and stopped at the bookstore once a month, but other than that, he never ventured into New Orleans. In 14 years, he'd never been to Bourbon Street or strolled through the French Quarter. He'd never sipped coffee at the Café du Monde or had a hurricane at Lafayette's blacksmith shop bar. Instead of visiting a gym, he worked out behind a trailer beneath a weather tarp he strung between his home and nearby trees. He didn't go to movies or kick back at a friend's place while the Saints played on Sunday afternoons. He was 42 years old and hadn't been on a date since he was a teenager. Most people wouldn't or couldn't have lived their lives that way, but they didn't know him. They didn't know who he had been or what he had done, and he wanted to keep it that way. Then, out of the blue, on a warm afternoon in mid-June, he received a phone call and memories of past rose anew. Dawson had been on leave for almost 9 weeks. For the first time in nearly 29 years, he was finally going home. The thought made him uneasy, but he knew he had no choice. Chuck had been more than just a friend, and he'd been like a father. And in the silence, as he reflected on the year that had been the turning point of his life, Dawson saw a flash of a movement once more. When he turned, there was nothing there at all, and he wondered again whether he was going crazy. The call had come from Morgan Tanner, an attorney in Oriental, North Carolina, who informed him that Tucker Hostetler had passed away. Their arrangements best handled in person, Tanner explained. Dawson's first instinct after hanging up was to book his flight and the room at a local bed and breakfast, then call a florist and arrange for delivery. The following morning, after locking the front door to the trailer, Dawson walked around toward the tin shed where he kept his car. It was Thursday, June 18th, 2009, and he carried with him the only suit he'd owned and a duffel bag he'd packed in the middle of the night when he hadn't been able to sleep. He unlocked the padlock and rolled up the door, watching sunlight stream onto the car he'd been restoring and repairing ever since high school. It was a 1969 fastback, the kind of car that turned heads when Nixon was president and still turned heads today. It looked as if it had been rolled off the assembly line, and over the years countless strangers had offered to buy it from him. Dawson had turned them down. It's more than just a car, he told them without further explanation. Tuck would have understood exactly what he meant. Dawson tossed the duffel bag onto the passenger seat and laid the suit on the top of it before sliding behind the wheel. When he turned the key, the engine came to life with a loud rumble, and he eased the car onto the gravel before hopping out to lock the shed. As he did, he ran through a mental checklist, making sure he had everything. 2 minutes later, he was on the main road, and half an hour after that, he kept parking in the long-term lot at the New Orleans airport. He hated leaving the car, but had no choice. He collected his things before starting towards the terminal where a ticket was waiting for him at the airline counter. The airport was crowded, men and women walking arm in arm, families off to visit grandparents or Disney World, students shuttling between home and school, business travelers rolled through carry-ons behind them, jabbering on cell phones. He stood in a slow-moving line and waited until a spot opened at the counter. He showed his identification and answered the basic security questions before being handed his boarding passes.